Good morning. My name is Bruce McIntosh. I'm a parent of 2 adults with disabilities. I'm a board member and was the founding president of the Ontario Autism Coalition. Beside me is David Lepofsky, also a parent of a child with disabilities. He's speaking as chair of the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance. David led the 10-year campaign that won the enactment of the AODA. He's also on the board of Ontario Parents of Visually Impaired Children, and he's the chair of the TDSB's Special Education Advisory Committee, or SEAC. Also here is Julia Evangelisto. She is a parent of 2 children with disabilities and co-chair of Ontario Parents for Education Support. That's a grassroots organization of parents of students with disabilities who advocate for better supports for their kids in school. Ontario has at least 250,000 students with disabilities in K-12 schools. They face far too many unfair disability barriers. The hardship for their families can be brutal, and things are getting worse. We'll tell you how and what must be done. Today is a very painful anniversary of government inaction for vulnerable students with disabilities. 4 years ago today, the Ford government received a groundbreaking, comprehensive report by a committee of experts that the government itself had picked. David Lepofsky was appointed as a member of that committee. The report revealed a stunning list of the many unfair barriers facing students with disabilities in our schools. It gave the Ford government a practical roadmap to fix those barriers. Its findings and recommendations had been applauded by disability community members and educators. It is the most comprehensive study of Ontario's school system from the perspective of students with disabilities in a lifetime. After 4 years, what has the Ford government done to enact those recommendations? Absolutely nothing. I'm talking about the January 28th, 2022 final report of the K-12 Education Standards Development Committee. It recommended what needs to be done in an education accessibility standard under the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. In opposition, the Tories demanded fast action to create this standard in government. They're working now at the lightning speed of a turtle. We have no education accessibility standard. The government keeps creating new disability barriers. It boasts of billions it spends on building new schools, but has not implemented any of the new steps in that report to ensure those schools are accessible to kids, parents, and staff with disabilities. Today's also an important anniversary for a second reason. 45 years ago today, a House of Commons committee took a historic vote to include equal rights for people with disabilities in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. People with disabilities fought hard for that right. David was one of them. They fought for that charter amendment to tear down the barriers facing students with disabilities in our schools, among other barriers. It's a right that is still far too frequently violated in our schools 45 years later. On this anniversary, how do things look for students with disabilities? For too many, it's not a pretty sight. They have a fundamental right to an education. Yet too many students with disabilities risk being told by their principal that they cannot come to school at all, full-day exclusions, or that they can only come to school for part of each school day, or shortened hours, partial day exclusions, a modified schedule. A rose by any other name smells as bad. That flagrantly violates their right to an education and is blistering disability discrimination to boot. 6 years ago this month, the Ontario Autism Coalition and the AODA Alliance held a news conference right here in this room calling for reforms. Why doesn't the province require a principal to at least give parents a reason for excluding their child from school? In 6 years, our kids are not assured that basic due process because of the Ford government's failure to act. On April 23, 2025, Community Living Ontario released a stunning report showing that 31% of their survey respondents reported that their child had been sent home or instructed to stay home because of a lack of resources. In July 2020, the AODA Alliance released a study of school board policies on exclusions. Most school boards did not track how often they exclude students from school. Neither does the Ford government. An AODA Alliance report in 2020 showed that each principal is a law unto themselves when it comes to this practice. Practices and policies vary wildly from one school board to the next. Where's the Ford government? Over a year ago, the Education Ministry at long last took the baby step of scheduling a meeting for December 10th, 2024, to consult some groups on a possible new policy on when schools could exclude a student with disabilities. The OAC was invited. The AODA Alliance wasn't invited. They heard about it and asked to be included. How did the government respond? The Ford government swiftly postponed that meeting, and over a year later, it has still not been rescheduled as far as we know. You'd only find out if you were invited. Last week, the Ontario Autism Coalition made public horrific news that Max Simao, a Hamilton student with disabilities, had only been allowed to go to school for part days. Last month, on December 11th, he was run over and killed by a local bus. Had he been in school at that time, instead of being excluded from school for part of the school day, he'd still be alive. The Ontario Autism Coalition conducts an annual survey of the families of students who are accessing or trying to access special education. The survey results for the 2023-24 school year showed that 37% of students with disabilities were excluded from all or part of the school day due to a shortage of education assistants. The report on the 2024-25 school year will be published next month. Spoiler alert, the result isn't much different. On June 3rd, 2024, People for Education released a survey of school principals showing that in 2023-24, 63% of elementary principals and 58% of secondary principals said they had recommended that students with special needs stay home due to a lack of needed EAs or other staff supports at school. That was up from 48 and 40% respectively in 2013-14, 10 years before. When we say it's getting worse, the data proves it. Our three organizations hear directly from parents of students with disabilities. We keep hearing horrible stories. So do members of special education advisory committees around Ontario. I won't take time to get into the nightmare of schools confining students to seclusion rooms without parental consent and proper supervision. The Ford government has still issued no directives to school boards almost 2 years after young Landon Ferris was found dead, his body cold, in a Trenton High School's isolation room. Although Stephen Lecce, the minister at the time, promised an investigation, there's been no coroner's inquest or independent inquiry. Last year, the Ford government seized control of 6 school boards, ousted their elected trustees, and appointed a provincial supervisor for each board. A supervisor gets a handsome $350,000 a year and only needs to work 3 days a week for it. And these supervisors don't have a clue how to run a school board. They're accountants with no experience in educating students. They report directly to the minister's office. The Minister of Education is hands-on running these boards. Those 6 boards have a combined 550,000 students. That means Doug Ford has already taken over 1/4 of the education system and is looking at taking over the rest of it. That's the Ford government that has a very troubling track record when it comes to tearing down barriers facing students with disabilities. As today's 4-year anniversary symbolizes, they're nowhere. I'll turn now to David Lepofsky. He's been the Toronto District School Board SEAC chair for the past 2 years, and he is speaking for himself, not that committee. David.
Good morning. From the perspective of the 40,000 students with disabilities at the Toronto District School Board, there's no sign that things have gotten any better since last June, since the trustees were ousted and since the supervisor appointed by the province took over. There are troubling signs that things have gotten worse. In a number of ways, these hurt not only those 40,000 students and their parents, but all 250,000 students at the TDSB and their parents as well. Last spring, as a response to our advocacy, the trustees at TDSB decided that there should remain a particular level of ceiling on 2 categories of special education classes, those for kids with mild intellectual disabilities and those for kids with any disabilities found in diagnostic kindergartens. The staff wanted to raise it. We opposed it. The trustees at their very last meeting voted with us. Within a few weeks, behind closed doors, meeting with the staff but not us, the supervisor reversed the trustees' decision, allowing for bigger class sizes in those 2 categories of special education classes. What about kids with disabilities in the mainstream classes? Those classes already can suffer from disability barriers. The K-12 Standards Development Committee made recommendations to fix that. Teachers who are overloaded and understaffed for support. And yet, the trustees had decided some months ago that for grades 4 to 8, there should be an absolute hard cap of how many students can be in an individual grade 4 to 8 class. Now, the province says that the average class can't exceed 24.5 kids, but that would leave the board free, or any board free, to have an individual class of any size, as long as the average is okay. And average kids don't study, individual ones do. Well, the trustees some months ago decided to set a cap of 32. A maximum that no class, grades 4 to 8, can have more than 32 children in it. Well, within weeks before this press conference, the TDSB supervisor rescinded that. That means a new barrier has been created facing students with disabilities. That's because if it's hard enough to properly support some students with disabilities in the mainstream class. It's even harder when the class gets bigger. A new barrier created by a board under direct provincial supervision. Let me give you the next example, and it has gotten some attention already. For parents of students with disabilities, they regularly have to navigate a cold, bureaucratic school board to try to ensure that their child's learning needs and disability-related learning needs are met. It's not a pretty process, believe me, even for those of us lucky enough to have a law degree and experience in the practice of law. For those who don't have that, for whom English may be a second language, who may come from communities where they are afraid to even challenge public authority, it's even worse. Their last resort, as a practical matter, for help had been the elected trustees. That's been removed. We came to this place back in November of last year saying that this is wrong, and we announced a campaign to encourage families to call the education minister himself, since he had displaced the only elected people that trustees could go to, and since he's running the system through his supervisors. We told them, the name of our campaign, better call Paul. Well, within 3 days, no doubt a complete coincidence, the Minister of Education announced the establishment of new student and family support offices in all boards, the initial 5 boards under supervision, starting this month, and other boards as of next September. Now, that could be helpful, there's no question. But City TV has reported that TDSB's Student and Family Support Office has an enormous 2 employees working in it to receive complaints from all families of all 250,000 students, including all 40,000 students with disabilities. That's pathetic. That is a formula for looking like you're doing something, but actually not doing very much. It gets worse because we know that the staff there are not required to be experts or have expertise in educating students with disabilities. It's not clear across the province whether these offices will be places staffed by people who proactively try to solve problems, or simply offices of people who ask the principal or superintendent what's going on, and then repeat to the parent what the parent has already been told before. Now, the acting director of TDSB, the acting director of education at the TDSB says they're going to be proactive problem solvers, but 2 people? 2 people for that whole board? I'm not holding my breath. And just because that acting director says that's how they're going to approach it, we have no idea what the permanent director will say or what's going to happen at the 71 other boards. That's all bad. It's even worse. If there's one thing we need, it's stability in school boards. What we've gotten is chaos. For the boards under supervision, provincial supervision, the staff are left wondering who's in charge and what's going to happen. For 2 of the 6 boards under supervision, the chaos has gotten worse because their supervisors, under provincial direction, no doubt, summarily fired their directors of education. I can tell you from my experience working with a school board, when that happens, it leads to all sorts of potential for internal chaos as senior management tries to figure out what direction the board's going to be going in and what's in store for them if they try to, advocate for something that may not be so well received in the minister's office. That's how I'd feel. Now, let me give you another illustration of how things have gotten worse, just at TDSB. Our Special Education Advisory Committee has pressed for years for the TDSB to do a major review of special education. We actually did our own, but we thought it would be worthwhile for a comprehensive review so they could look to see where things could be improved. Commendably, a year and a half ago, we were told that TDSB would be doing so, and that our Special Education Advisory Committee, representing parents and their associations, would have a voice in it at each stage. Well, the outline of the program of the review was announced last January, but when the supervisor took over, without consulting us before so deciding, he put it on hold. And then just a couple of weeks ago at our January 12th, 2026 Special Education Advisory Committee meeting, we were told by the acting director of education that the new terms for this review are out. The new terms, put politely, are a major reduction in the review. And did I mention we weren't consulted on it? Now, you'd think there's a solution. At least get a copy of that document and then go public and have a public discussion about it. I asked for a copy of the document that the Director of Education publicly read at our meeting 2 weeks ago. I was refused. I was told I'd get a summary. I've had to resort to a Freedom of Information request as chair of their Special Education Advisory Committee to get a copy of a document that was read to us at a public meeting. This is symbolic of the increased bureaucratic resistance to parents' voice that I'm seeing, and I fear others will see as well. Under the regulations that create the Special Education Advisory Committee, when we made a recommendation to the trustees, they were required by law to give us a chance to be heard before they make a decision on it. Now we have a supervisor, when we've sent recommendations to him, standing in their shoes, fulfilling their role. He has rejected each of our recommendations and has done so without even giving us a chance to be heard before he makes that decision. And he does it behind closed doors, not, as trustees would do, at a public meeting. I've had a couple of meetings with the supervisor. This isn't personal to the individual. We've got a good professional working relationship, and that's great. But it's a system that's broken. On the Special Education Advisory Committee of each school board, trustees, at least some of them, are supposed to be able to be members. We had 2 or 3. Well, their position was eliminated, so I invited the TDSB supervisor to come to our meetings. After all, he's standing in their shoes. He's declined to come to any of our meetings, any of them so far. The invitation is still outstanding. All of this is deeply worrisome, but there are 2 things that just make it look worse for us. First, parents' voice, which is supposed to be so central, is, in our case, encountering more and more barriers. Look at the TDSB's strategic plan. It talks about parents as partners. They do a whole conference for parents of kids with special education needs called Parents as Partners. It's a great slogan, but what's happening? Special Education Advisory Committee, one way that we hear from parents and interact with them, is by them being able to watch our meetings without having to physically come there. That's why they've been live streamed for years and are in other school boards. But the Minister of Education, for no defensible reason, ordered the TDSB and other boards under supervision to shut off the live stream. He gave reasons for it, and the reasons were, forgive me, nonsense. Well, thankfully, in some cases, there are community groups that are prepared to themselves live stream it, but it's an illustration of how trivialized or marginalized parents' voices are. We, a year and a half ago, held a town hall at our Special Education Advisory Committee for parents of special ed students and heard wrenching stories. We've wanted to do it again. Even before the supervisor came in, senior TDSB staff opposed it for 2025 or 26. Well, now that they have a supervisor in place and decisions are all made behind closed doors, and we have no trustees to take our appeal to, their position just remains the same. Watch for our meeting in April of this year. Won't be on live stream, but you'll be welcome to come to it. We're doing what we can within the rules we can to hear directly from parents. The last thing. One of the important areas that our committee, that a Special Education Advisory Committee is supposed to be able to consulted on, is the special education budget. We are the only place where there can be a public discussion and a debate over the TDSB's budget. That used to be a core focus of trustee meetings, of a whole trustee budget committee that met in public in meetings that were live streamed. No longer. All behind closed doors. The only tiny little place there is to hear about it is at one of our meetings of the Special Education Advisory Committee. Let me give you an illustration of what can be learned when we let a glimmer of sunlight in, and we were the only place where it could take place. At the January 12th meeting of the Special Education Advisory Committee, the senior budget chief for the board, Mr. Craig Snyder, came to speak to us about the budget. I asked him if there had been any cuts to the budget since the supervisor was appointed. After all, as we all know, the Premier and the Minister of Education decided to take over the Toronto District School Board because they lambasted the trustees for approving a budget last spring that had a deficit. So you'd figure the first thing a supervisor would come in and do is look at cutting the budget to get the deficit eliminated. Now, I'm not advocating for any budget cuts. We need more money, not less. But you'd think that was core to their obligation. The budget was so bad, thought the province, that it was necessary to take over the board and oust the trustees, Ontarians were told. Now, let me play 5 seconds from that meeting. It's all I need, but the whole meeting is available on the Ontario Autism Coalition's YouTube page. We were told by Mr. Craig Snyder that they are still operating under the budget that the trustees approved last spring. Could we just roll those 5 seconds of audio, please?
But the budget itself for the 25-26 year remains the same. But the budget itself.
Thank you. That is the voice of Mr. Craig Snyder. So what we now know is that the stated reason for taking over the board has not led to the changes, or to the changes that are to a change to that budget. It leads one to wonder, is that the real reason? Why are the trustees not back in place? Why aren't we going back to where we were since the very reason for taking over the board has turned out to be something which the province itself has not changed, even though it has the direct power to do so. Well, with that, let me turn to Julia.
Parents of students with disabilities are raising the alarm about the reality our children are facing in Ontario classrooms. The government may claim record investments, but from a parent perspective, that is not what children with disabilities are experiencing. Believe me, we would know. We would welcome the opportunity to sit down with Minister Calandra again to share what is actually happening in our schools, so decisions can be informed by the lived experiences of families navigating the system every day. What parents are paying attention to right now is not the isolated incidents involving individual trustees. It is the growing uncertainty around the future of local elected school trustees altogether. Trustees play a critical role in advocating for local schools and the special education supports students with disabilities depend on. In boards that are now under provincial supervision, parents are finding it harder, not easier, to navigate the system. Parents are left without a clear place to go for answers, and issues that were once resolved locally now stall or go unanswered. That does not address the real issue, ensuring students with disabilities receive the support they need in schools. The Education Act requires parent participation in special education committees, in the development of individual education plans, and the decisions about the programs and services being offered to their children. We want the same parent voice reflected in the broader decisions that shape our school system, because our kids have been marginalized for too long. Staffing levels, including the availability of educational assistants, are set through ministry-level decisions, and when those decisions don't reflect student needs, students with disabilities lose support and access to learning. Those disruptions matter because childhood and education doesn't pause while systems catch up. That's why parents are asking for action on accessibility. The Education Accessibility Standard has been promised for years, and it's time to deliver.
Thank you for coming, all. We'd be happy to take questions.
I just have one quick question, and then I'll maybe grab you guys for some one-on-ones after. But I did ask the Premier last week about the understaffing of educational assistants in classrooms, and he said that they are funding at historic levels. He also said that they are hiring 6,000 educators on like both teachers and EAs. What do you make of that response? Like, is 6,000? Would 6,000 be enough? Is it? Do you think that that's actually happening?
Yeah. That's an unrealistic number, and I don't know where he's getting that figure from, because there are literally no applicants for educational assistant programs entering into those college programs. So the graduation rate for those students entering in the field is not meeting the demand of what is currently even in the system. And the supply pools are empty. Boards have been told they are not allowed to hire any more educational assistants. So if he plans on getting 6,000 of them, I don't know where from. We are not training them ourselves in our province. Colleges and universities are so underfunded as well. Just a couple weeks ago, I sat with my MPP, who's the parliamentary assistant to colleges and universities, Deepak Anand, and he was shocked at the numbers that we were showing him of the amount of applicants to educational assistant type college programs, being that is his portfolio, and didn't understand the scope and the severity of the shortage of staff. And it was quite alarming to him. So being in the Ministry of Colleges and Universities, that he should know the capacity of the programs that are able to educate people to enter into the workforce. Those people are just not there.
Let me just add to it, if I may. This is what I call the government's Santa Claus defense, right? Oh, we're so generous, we're giving. Here's the problem. You can be spending more than before, but if before is grossly inadequate, you can add a percentage to it, and it could still end up being inadequate. If you want to know what funding level is needed, you need to go out there, find out what's happening on the front lines in classrooms, find out what parents of students with disabilities can actually report back is happening to their kids, and then come up with a funding level that actually would meet their needs. But if they don't do that kind of outreach, if they don't talk to us, they just applaud themselves for their spending, they're going to miss the mark.
Just going back to what Bruce started off with, which was the report. I know it's a comprehensive report, but is there one action item that you would want to see implemented immediately? Like, is there something that should happen literally tomorrow that would make a significant difference?
I was on that committee, and I can give you one right now, and it's one that at the Toronto District School Board we've been trying for a decade to get action on. And it's one that we've presented not only to revolving door senior management at the board, to trustees, but also to the, I personally wrote the supervisor about. The report found that parents of students with disabilities around Ontario find it very difficult to just find out what's available for their child at the school board, what services, what support, what options, and where to go to get them. You can't advocate if you don't know what's available to advocate for. And it's hard to find out where to go to actually get help and get decisions. And detailed recommendations were advanced for how to solve this problem. It's just a matter of a communication strategy, of effectively figuring out, like a pamphlet that goes home to all parents. Is your child having difficulty with learning at school? They may have a disability and they may need an accommodation. We'd like to help. Here are the kinds of things we could do. Here's where to go to find out more. Just as an illustration, and we've spent hours pointing this out to TDSB senior staff. If you read what's on their website or you read their brochures, unless you know all the techno-babble of education lingo, you don't even get a good start on knowing what they're saying. And even then, you won't find answers to key questions like, what are the different options available? And where do I go to get it to get an opportunity to advocate for these?
Thank you. I'll grab you after that.
I just have something to add
Sure,
as well.
yeah.
You asked if there was one thing to ask for. What would that be? Yesterday, I spoke at the pre-budget consultations for the Kapuskasing hearing, and that question was asked to me as well. And the biggest impact that would have on classrooms, on students, and on teachers and other teaching staff would be smaller class sizes. You can't do any good teaching if you have 28, 30 plus kids in a space that was not designed for that many people. The higher grades you get, the bigger bodies are. Think about a grade 7 and 8 classrooms. Those kids are big, they're smelly, and their stuff takes up a lot of space. And if you have 28 or more children in those classes, you're bumping arms, you're bumping into each other. There's not enough room to move around. Kids that have difficulties regulating their emotions and their behaviors are having hard times in those classes that are packed, because there's not enough space for them to be able to move around freely and without accidentally bumping or something. And we're hearing a lot about student violence. A big contributor to that is the physical space and the amount of students that are being crammed into those spaces. And anyone that is having any sort of a difficult time, you can't calm yourself down when you're packed in there like sardines. So if we're even looking at special education classes, those class sizes have ballooned over the years. They need smaller class sizes too, to be able to focus on the disabilities and the specific teaching instruction and specialized instruction that those kids need. Smaller class sizes is the first step in how we do this. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about kindergarten or grade 12 or any grade in between. I don't know the last time Minister Calandra was in a kindergarten class with 30 kids running around with multiple needs, with multiple language barriers. In those classes, you've got a teacher, a ECE, and maybe some EAs if you're lucky. And it's just unmanageable. You are in crisis mode rather than teaching mode, and nobody's getting what they want, especially the students with disabilities.
I'm going to just take one last moment to respond to Mr. Ford's assertions. He would dearly love that to be the only narrative. He would dearly love there to be no one to contest what he has to say. So I'm sure would Paul Calandra. They are actively trying to squelch any of that alternative point of view, all alternative facts. Not live streaming SEAC meetings is an example. We wouldn't have known that the budget chair had that information about what's in place being no different from what was in place when the board was put under supervision. We wouldn't know had it not been recorded. David has to file an FOI to get a copy of a document that was read to them. That's absurd. Trustees are there to advocate on behalf of the community, and they're being pushed aside. Trustees, for example, in the Ottawa Carleton Board, decided that they were going to make the choice to preserve special education levels in the budget as opposed to school boundary changes, and their supervisor reversed that. If it weren't for the trustees complaining about it, we wouldn't have known. Parents who were directly involved in the issue. It's getting increasingly easy for the boards and the ministry to suppress information. Those call centers with two people where your call is important to us is going to be the order of the day, are staff. They are not trustees who will feel free to speak out about budgetary issues and bad decisions being made by senior staff at the board or at the ministry. They're staff. And by definition, they are going to be less inclined to speak out. There is an increasing exertion of control and limit on information and commentary that's available at the expense of a truly fulsome understanding of the financial position of school boards. And I'm sure Messrs. Ford and Calandra are quite happy about that.
I just want to add one thing to what Bruce said. I'm not here to defend the status quo of how trustees operate across the board. This is a case of mend it, don't end it. We've already seen for a quarter of the province what happens when the provincial government runs these boards rather than there being any local democratic oversight at all. They need more democratic oversight. I can tell you from 33 years working in the Ontario Public Service as a lawyer with very good public servant colleagues and 10 years on the Special Education Advisory Committee for Canada's largest school board, that the last thing you want are any senior bureaucrats in an organization who don't have to worry about any democratic oversight as a practical matter. That is a formula for problems, and I'm seeing how it plays out. And I'm very, very worried. When the Premier, in your news article last week, responded to your questions by referring yet again to two trustees for a different board who went on a ridiculous trip to Italy to buy art, we can all condemn that, and we should. But we should not condemn all trustees as if that's how they all behave, any more than we would condemn all members of the legislature and call for it to be shut down and abolished when any party in power has any member who individually does something that turns out to be completely inappropriate.
I'll also mention just one thing on that, on Doug Ford's comments in response to the amount of funding that he's been given. And he commented last week after the press conference on Max's story. And he's quoted numbers, and Bruce, correct me if I'm wrong, that he quoted the budget was at $500 million and he's increased it to $700 million. And what was picked up afterwards was those are numbers from the Ontario Autism Program budget, not the education budget. So he's looking at the wrong thing as where he is putting money. He's not giving us the right numbers when he's responding to that, so he's not even answering the question. He doesn't know what is going in and out, and he's just quoting the wrong numbers. And so that really tells me the focus that he has on education and how low his priority is in it.
Mr. Calandra visited a charter school in England recently, had glowing things to say about it. Just wait for the dissection of public education in Ontario. Just wait for it. Doesn't take a lot of imagination.
All right. Thank you.